Dreamliner, Air India flight AI-171, lifts off the runway. It's a perfectly clear afternoon. Everything seems completely routine, a textbook departure. But then, just seconds after its wheels leave the ground, the unimaginable happens. Both engines, suddenly, just lose all power. What makes this so profoundly perplexing, almost chilling, is what came out in the preliminary investigation report. They found that right after takeoff, the fuel switches for both engines moved from the run position to cutoff. And then the cockpit voice recorder. Investigators heard one pilot ask pretty clearly, "Why did you cut the fuel switch?" Only to hear the immediate reply like, total bewilderment, "I didn't."
Yeah, it's a mystery that still has aviation experts just scratching their heads. Our mission in this deep dive really is to meticulously unpack that sequence of events. Air India flight AI-171, June 12, 2025. We'll explore those preliminary findings, sift through the various theories out there, and really try to understand what could possibly have happened on that flight. We'll guide you through the data, the aircraft itself, the crew, and those critical moments that led to such a terrible tragedy.
Okay, so let's set the scene for you. It's the morning of June 12, 2025. Ahmedabad International Airport. The atmosphere was, calm. Pretty routine, actually. Clear air, blue sky. Just a normal day at a busy airport.
And amidst all that normal activity, there's Air India's Boeing 7878 Dreamliner, tail number VTNB. It's prepping for flight AI-171 to London. Now, this same plane had landed just a couple of hours before, coming in from Delhi as AI-423. There was a minor technical issue on that earlier flight, but maintenance sorted it out quickly, cleared it, ready to go for the London landing.
And the crew. Who was in the cockpit?
Two experienced pilots. Captain Sumit Sabharwal, 56 years old, very experienced, 15,600 total flying hours, and a lot of that, 8,200 hours, on the 787 specifically. His first officer was Clive Kundar, 32 years old, also experienced, 3,400 total hours, with over 1,100 on the Dreamliner.
Right. And crucially, the report mentions they both passed their breathalyzer tests about an hour and a half before the flight, deemed perfect for duty.
Absolutely. Everything checked out, 230 passengers on board. Fuel load was 54,200 kilos, takeoff weight 213,400 kilos, all well within the normal operating limits for the 787. And investigators confirmed no dangerous goods on the plane either. So by all accounts, everything looked completely standard, ready for a normal flight.
So everything's checked, everything looks good. The usual pre-flight steps start. ATC recordings, they show the pushback requests at 1:3 p.m., then line up on runway 23 at 1:33. Was there anything at all unusual in the communications or the conditions at that point?
No, absolutely nothing. In fact, the weather was, perfect. Just a light 6-knot wind, clear skies, visibility over 6 kilometers. Pilots would call it ideal conditions for takeoff. Really, everything pointed towards a totally normal departure.
And yet, we know it didn't stay normal for very long. So the first officer pushes the thrust levers forward at 1:37 p.m., captain's monitoring. Walk us through those next few critical seconds on the runway.
Okay, so the flight recorder data, the EAFR, shows that at 1:38 and 33 seconds p.m., the aircraft hit V1 speed. That's 153 knots, or about 283 kilometers per hour. And V1, for listeners, that's the on-go point. Once you pass V1, you're committed to taking off.
Right, the point of no return.
Exactly. Then, just 2 seconds later, 1.38.35, it hits VR, the rotation speed, 155 knots. And then, 4 seconds after that, 1.38.39 p.m., Air India 171 lifts off the runway. Successfully. Up to this point, everything is absolutely by the book.
Okay. And for the next, 3 seconds? It keeps accelerating, hits 180 knots, engine still at full thrust. Airport CCTV footage even confirms a totally normal liftoff. Nothing looked wrong from the ground. But then the flight data shows something catastrophic happening.
Yes. Immediately after hitting 180 knots, the EAFR data shows this sudden dramatic change. The fuel cutoff switches. For both Engine 1 and Engine 2, they moved from run to cutoff. And what's deeply unsettling is the timing. They moved just 1 second apart.
1 second apart. Wow. And that action, moving those switches, it instantly cuts the fuel flow to both engines, right?
Instantly. You see the N1 and N2 values, those are key indicators of engine power. They just start plummeting rapidly. Essentially, the engines were being starved of fuel. They were dying.
And the cockpit voice recorder? That chilling exchange?
Yes, the CVR captured it right at that moment. One pilot asked, "Why did you cut the fuel switch?" And the immediate reply, "I didn't." And still, the investigation hasn't determined who said what, which just adds another layer to this whole mystery.
And there was physical evidence too, wasn't there? Something seen on the CCTV footage.
That's right. The footage also showed the ram air turbine, the RAT, deploying almost immediately after liftoff. The RAT is basically a small emergency wind turbine. It drops down automatically when the main engines fail to provide essential hydraulic and electrical power.
So seeing the RAT deploy is a huge red flag.
Massive one. It's a visual confirmation from the outside that something disastrous happened to the power systems right after takeoff. And matching that, the aircraft was seen losing altitude very quickly. The EAFR data confirms it too. Both engines' N2 values dropped below minimum idle speed. The plane was basically falling.
Then came the distress call. At 1:39.05 p.m., ATC picks up a mayday from AI-171. But when ATC asks for the call sign, just silence. No further response.
Yeah. And the controllers in the tower, they then had to watch. They watched the aircraft go down outside the airport boundary. It hit a chimney first, part of an Army Medical Corps building, and then crashed into the BJ Medical College hostel. The wreckage field was huge, spread over maybe 1,000 feet long, 400 feet wide, just devastating.
And a human cost. Just horrific.
Unimaginable. All 12 crew members, 229 passengers, all lost, plus 19 people on the ground tragically caught in the impact. There was just one survivor from the plane, a passenger who happened to be near an emergency exit. A complete miracle, really.
It's hard to even comprehend from a perfect takeoff to that in seconds. So the investigation begins. The preliminary report, 15 pages, details what they found in the wreckage. Things like the flap handle assembly found set at 5 degrees, which is normal for takeoff, confirmed by the data. The landing gear lever was still down.
And the thrust levers, even though they were badly burned, they were found pushed forward, indicating the pilots were commanding full power, or trying to.
But then, the biggest twist, those fuel control switches, the ones that the data showed moving to cut off. Expert, what did the report say about where they found those switches in the wreckage?
This is where it gets incredibly confusing. They were found back in the run position.
Back in run. So, after being moved to cut off just after takeoff, the pilots must have moved them back to run before the crash.
That's what the physical evidence strongly suggests. They somehow managed to re-engage the fuel supply in those final seconds. And this brings us right back to the design of those switches. They aren't simple toggles. They're specifically engineered, to prevent exactly this kind of accidental activation, especially at critical moments like takeoff. You need two hands to operate them. One hand has to push or release a locking mechanism, while the other hand pulls the switch itself up or down.
2 hands per switch.
Per switch. It's physically impossible to operate one of those switches correctly with just one hand.
Okay, hold on. So, the data shows both switches moved to cut off 1 second apart. The CVR has the pilots denying they did it. The switches need a deliberate two-handed action. And then they're found back in the run position. How does that even compute? The report saying it looks like human intervention feels like a massive understatement.
It's deeply puzzling. And the report adds more detail. It estimates Engine 1's fuel was cut for about 10 seconds, Engine 2's maybe 14 seconds. Yeah. But here's the really critical finding from the engine analysis. There was evidence, clear evidence, that both engines were just starting to produce thrust again, right at the moment of impact.
So they were trying to recover, they got the fuel flowing again, the engines were spooling up, they just ran out of time and altitude.
Exactly. It points to a desperate, conscious effort to save the aircraft in those final moments, which really complicates any simple explanation.
Right. So if everything seemed normal, plane okay, crew okay, fuel okay, and the pilots denied cutting the fuel, yet it happened. What could explain it? There's this malfunction theory, right? Linked to that FAA bulletin from 2018.
Yes. The report mentions a special Airworthiness Information Bulletin, an SAIB. It came out in 2018, and it specifically warned about a potential issue with the locking feature on these types of fuel control switches, that it could possibly disengage.
And this wasn't just a general warning about switches, was it?
No, that's the crucial part. The SAIB was issued because operators of Boeing 737s had reported problems, but the bulletin referenced part number 4TL8373D. That exact same part number was used for the fuel control switches installed on this Air India 787 VTNB. The design, including that lock, is similar across different Boeing models.
So the FAA knew there might be an issue with this specific switch type potentially not locking correctly?
Yes, they warned that some switches might have been installed or could end up in a state where the lock was already disengaged, making them easier to move unintentionally.
Okay, but then there's the fact Air India, they skipped the inspection recommended by that bulletin because it was just an advisory, not mandatory.
That's correct. It highlights that difficult line airlines sometimes walk. And SAIB says, hey, look at this. but it's not an airworthiness directive, an AD, which forces action.
It feels like a significant detail, though, given what happened.
It certainly adds a layer. But, and this is a huge but, even if the locking mechanism on both switches was faulty or disengaged, how do you explain both of them moving to cut off 1 second apart purely by accident, right after liftoff?
Yeah, the timing. It just doesn't sound like a random malfunction, that 1 second gap. It feels deliberate, sequential.
It makes a purely accidental mechanical failure seem highly, highly improbable. For both independent switches to fail in that specific timed way, that's almost inconceivable mechanically.
Which inevitably leads some people to think about,
Yeah.
well,
Wow.
the unthinkable. An intentional act. Pilot suicide. We've sadly seen cases before. Germanwings 9525, Lamb Mozambique 470, Egyptair 990, Silkair 185. Often a key sign was the pilot locking the other out, or just total silence towards ATC.
Correct. But that's exactly where the evidence for AI-171 just doesn't line up with that theory at all, really. The counter-arguments are very strong here. First, and most powerfully, they re-engage the fuel switches. Why try to restart the engines if your intent is to crash? It makes no sense.
Right, that's a huge contradiction.
Second, the CVR shows them talking, interacting, not the silence or isolation you often see. Third, they sent a mayday call just seconds before impact. Again, why call for help if you intend to crash?
And the plane's attitude at the end.
Exactly. Flight data, eyewitnesses that confirmed the nose was pitching up. They were actively fighting to climb, trying to use whatever thrust was starting to come back from the engines. It's the complete opposite of a controlled flight into terrain. It was a desperate fight for survival.
So the suicide theory, based on the available evidence, it just doesn't seem to fit the facts of this case.
No, it really doesn't hold up when you examine those key actions in the final seconds.
Which leaves us right back where we started, with this profound, enduring mystery. Seconds after a perfectly normal takeoff, fuel cut off inexplicably. Then, this frantic two-handed effort by the pilots to get the power back online. An effort that tragically failed just moments too soon.
It's the conflicting evidence that's so baffling.
Yeah.
You have these switches designed not to be moved accidentally, requiring that deliberate two-handed action. You have the CVR denial, I didn't do it. You have that FAA bulletin warning about a potential lock flaw, which wasn't acted upon. And then you have the pilot's final, undeniable actions trying to save the plane. Restarting engines, pulling the nose up.
It throws both simple explanations, pure mechanical failure or pure pilot intent, into serious doubt for very different reasons.
Precisely. Both scenarios leave critical questions unanswered based on the evidence we have from the preliminary report.
So the final thought we want to leave you with is this. If a clear-cut mechanical failure seems improbable because of the timing and sequence, and if a deliberate crash seems unlikely because of the clear recovery attempts, what other possibilities could even exist to explain both engines shutting down almost simultaneously at the most critical phase of flight?
What does this deep dive into Air India Flight AI-171 make you wonder about the incredibly fine line between human factors, the reliability of machines, and those moments where something completely unexpected happens in the sky?